So first I'm going to go over the new boards. There's not really too much to go over with these, so I'm going to keep this brief. So here's the Gorge map. You will see there's paths that link opposite sides together, which I've got to play with this. It's very interesting. The only real thing that is worth going over here is how the forests are divided. So the bridge does not divide anything. So if I was playing the Vagabond, I could move to the forest here, and then I could go here. This doesn't block. Additionally, I could go here, and I could also go here on my turn because these little cliff sides do not block. What does block is this sort of dam right here. So I couldn't go from here to here and then from here to here. I would have to cross over here into another forest before going here. That's really the only major difficulty in understanding this board. Aside from that, it's basically everything you've already seen. The next map is the Marsh map. This is your devoted 5 to 6 player map, but there are different ways of setting it up if you want to play with fewer. So unlike most maps, this actually contains 15 clearings instead of 12. So if you're playing with 4 or fewer, you actually put down these little things that flood tiles. These have a little square on them or other symbol, and they'll either be filled in or blank. So here on the map, you can see the corresponding filled in square here and the blank square here. Nothing's on there, so this is where we would put this here. And you would do that for all the other tiles. So these just omit spaces on the board. They do not exist anymore, and instead are replaced by paths. So you'll have some of these paths that sort of go somewhere but don't actually lead to anywhere. This is a flooded path, and for the sake of movement, you can't really use it to move on. But if you're moving through forests and counting different areas, this essentially acts to define that there is a separation between these two. This one, on the other hand, is a sort of three-way path. So if I were to move units on this path, I would, as one movement, go down and then go another way. Notably, if you have anything that cares about paths, such as the highway bandits, you are never able to place them on the center. You would have to choose one of these paths that they would go on. So if they were here, I could move all of these and we'd go here, totally unaffected, but I would only really be affected by the highway bandit if I moved over here, where I would have this guy die. If you are playing a 5 to 6 player game, then setup is going to be a little different, where you will have 15 clearings, but for the empty 3 clearings, you're going to place these 3 landmarks. So here I've set them down, and these essentially will act as clearing markers. So this is a fox clearing, this is a mouse clearing, and then that's a rabbit clearing. But they also have different abilities that they add to the game as well. So for Foxborough, this essentially acts as a space that is adjacent to all other fox clearings that can be moved on them while ignoring all other restrictions. So I could take these crows here and as one move go over here, and then as a second move I could just go to a completely different fox clearing. This does not ignore rule. Next is Mousehold. This almost acts like a field hospital for all different factions. If the cats attacked me and I rolled something like this, where they dealt 3 damage and I lost these guys, I could, instead of taking them off the board forever, I could place them at Mousehold instead. For Rabbit Town, you can place units here once per turn by spending a rabbit card. So I could just like discard this, and then I get to place units at Rabbit Town equal to the amount of units that I have in other rabbit clearings. So right now, that's just 2. So I would place them here. However, I would have to battle there immediately after. So, well, in that case, it wasn't very consequential, but you get the idea. For setting up the frogs, you are going to be placing 5 frog warriors and 1 enclave token in a river clearing. The exception to this is in ad set, if there's no river clearing available to be a homeland, you instead set up this adjacent to a river. So I'll just put this here. Notably, the enclave token has to be set to its peaceful side. Setting it here, that's for later. Next up, you're going to take the frog card deck, and you are going to shuffle it into the main deck. The exception of this being if you're playing 2-player, you will remove the frog dominance card before shuffling it in. You're also going to be taking the pond, and you are going to be setting it next to the deck. You also have the ability to buy these resin markers for frog enclaves. You don't need to, but I will, and I just think it looks prettier, so I'm going to use them. There are also these 2 cards. If you are playing with Woodland Alliance or Lizard Cult, you'll want to give these to them. They're just rules clarification cards. Let's go over the 3 passives. They're pretty simple here. The first one is Swimmers. Like the otters, the Riverfolk Company, frogs can move between rivers and other bodies of water, ignoring rules. The second thing is called Fears Come to Pass. Let's say the crows just fought this, and that frog got removed. Fears Come to Pass would make all these enclave tokens on their peaceful side flip to their hostile side that have crows occupying them, or the attacker. For each of these tokens that are flipped over, the frogs get an additional unit. So 1 goes here, 1 goes here, and 1 goes here. Notably, there is a hostile clearing here with a bird already, but because it wasn't flipped just now, it doesn't get an extra warrior. This also applies if tokens are removed in another way outside of combat, such as with the bomb with the Corvid Conspiracy. That would be enough to cause these different enclaves to flip in the same way. Final passive ability is Negotiations. Once during an opponent's turn, they can flip a militant enclave to peaceful. But if they do that, if somebody other than them rules that clearing, they draw a card. Now to go over something very important. When you have these enclaves out, they add a suit to the clearing. If that clearing is peaceful, then it shares the suits that are already there. So in this case, it's a mouse and a frog clearing. But if it's militant, then it overwrites the original suit. So this is only a frog clearing. You can only use rabbit if this would be flipped to peaceful again. The frog cards have different backs, and you can see when they're going to be drawn in the game. Notably, when you have a frog card in your hand and you discard it for any reason, it doesn't go into the usual discard pile and instead goes into the pond on top. Do not mix up the pond because order matters. If a player would draw a card, they can choose to draw from the usual deck, or they can draw the top card of the pond if they would rather do that. With all that out of the way, let's go over what the frogs do in their actions. The first thing they do is they craft using their enclaves, pretty self-explanatory. Next, they choose to either rally or reconcile. To rally, you are going to place 1 warrior at each militant enclave. So that would be, in this case, only this would be one that I could do. Everything else is currently peaceful. But if I instead reconcile, I get to flip any number of my militant enclaves to peaceful. But if you do that, the ruler of that clearing gets to draw a card. So in this case, that'd be the crows. During daylight, you get to choose 3 actions, and they can be any combination of settle or provoke. First is settle. You choose a clearing on the board, and you move into it any number of times. So if I chose this clearing, I could move from here, and also I could move all these here, just in one action. Then I get to either battle there if I would like, or I get to place a peaceful enclave if I so desire. Alternatively, I can provoke, which means that I flip a peaceful enclave of my choice to its militant side. Instead, I can place a militant enclave at either a river or at a diaspora warrior. Notably, you cannot have more than one of these enclave tokens in one clearing at the same time. Then after you do that, you are going to place 1 warrior at each militant enclave. Whether you chose to flip a peaceful to militant or place a new militant, you would be doing that for this action. However, once you're done, you're going to have to discard a random card at random. Finally, in evening, you must battle at each militant enclave. Next up is integrate. If you want, you can discard 1 card from your hand. So like I could discard a bunny card, and this would allow me to score a victory point per each clearing that has the bunny suit. I would not be able to score this one because it is not a rabbit suit. It is being covered up by the frog. This one, on the other hand, I would be able to score a point for. You can use bird cards for this. That's probably the most efficient way to do it, but you cannot use frog cards because that would be ridiculous. You'll then draw a number of cards equal to the number of peaceful enclaves on the map, and then you discard down to 5. Another noteworthy thing is that factions like the Crows, if they were to discard a card to place bird warriors out, they would be able to discard a frog and then get a warrior at every single one of these enclaves that have the frog suit. So in that sense, factions like the Crows get a pretty decent boost. With the Woodland Alliance, you will be able to use cards to spread sympathy using frog cards and the like. However, you wouldn't be able to do something like revolt at a militant clearing. The reason for this is that your bases that you'd be able to put up only have these 3 suits, and this is none of them. If you have a base at an enclave, you can train, but the penalty for losing a base, if the base was at an enclave, means that you're also going to be discarding frog supporters. With the lizard folk, if you reveal a frog card to recruit or build, you can recruit a lizard folk using that, and they just be able to go into like a militant clearing or whatever. But notably for gardens, you can only place them in peaceful clearings that match their original suit. So I could do this, but I would not be able to do that over here. Now to explain probably my favorite faction from this new expansion, the Twilight Council. They are an insurgent faction with a reach of 4. For setup, you will choose a corner clearing and you will place 4 of your Bat Warriors. The rules are essentially the same in the advanced setup. And this is my starting clearing, and I would place 2 warriors in a different clearing for a total of 6. Notably, this clearing does not have to be adjacent, so I could do this, or I could make it adjacent. It's whatever I want. You would then set up your player board, which involves taking all of your 6 assemblies and placing them on here. Okay, so the first passive ability that the Twilight Council have, and arguably the most important, is their governor's ability. So their tokens that they're able to place down have a closed side and an open side. When closed, they essentially are just a regular token that have no properties. When they're opened, however, and governing, they have very, very limiting abilities. At an open clearing, it is against the rules for players other than you to place things. They cannot flip pieces. They cannot take pieces. They cannot remove pieces. And they cannot craft with pieces. The only way that you can do any of these is if you battle in a clearing and remove pieces like so. Next ability is Entreating. On a player's turn, they may force you to flip an assembly to closed. In exchange, you get to do one of the following. So you can store up to 4 loyalist pieces on your board, and when they entreat, you may gain a loyalist, or you can take any number of loyalists and place them at the affected assembly. So I could place 1 here, or I could just place all if I really felt like it. The next ability is Peacekeepers. If 2 factions fight one another and you are nearby in the clearing, you will automatically take the defense's side. So if a battle like this happened here against the Vagabond, where it's Vagabond versus the Woodland Alliance, the Bat would defend this token first before the token gets taken off. Notably, the Twilight Council will never defend the Vagabond because everybody hates the Vagabond. So let's go over a Twilight Council's turn. Similar to the Lizard Cult, you are going to be revealing cards from your hand in order to take your actions. So in Birdsong, you will be revealing cards one by one to do those. So I could use this mouse card to move warriors from it. I could use this mouse card to recruit 1 warrior at that clearing. I could battle. Notably, if I were to battle just in this scenario, it would work how you'd imagine. But if there is an assembly there, I will lose the card because I'm not really supposed to be fighting around an assembly. The other thing that I can do with this card is Assemble. So I would be able to place a closed assembly at a matching clearing. So like this one I could do, and then I can place any amount of my loyalists. These are the little guys here. So I'll just place 1. And that would be my action. But if I didn't end up ruling the clearing after I did all my things, like if I didn't put 1 there, I would be forced to discard this card. During daylight, because we're bats, we sleep. This essentially just means that any assemblies that are ruled by enemies are flipped over to their closed side. Notably, if nobody rules the clearing, they will still stay on their open side. Even if I wasn't here, it wouldn't be ruled by enemies. Finally, in the evening, we convene Woodfolk, which essentially means that we take the cards that we revealed and we return them to our hand. And with each card that we reveal this way, we do a special action. If you're taking bird cards, you're limited to doing 1 action, but if you're taking any of the other cards, you get to do 1 of 2 things. If I take this fox card back to my hand right here, I don't know why I'd reveal an ambush card, haha. This allows me to do either a banish or agitate move in this clearing. So banish is like a special battle action here. I would ignore any hits that I take, so even though I would technically get hit once, I would not. But my hits to the opponents force them to move how I want them to move. This does not affect their pieces, but any sort of modifiers to combat that would apply to them, such as in this case, they're guarding a relic, that would apply. So if I rolled a 1 and 1, nothing would happen. I ignore all rolled hits I would take, and they ignore one rolled hit, so that wouldn't do anything. The other thing that I could do here is if I reveal the card, I can do what is known as an agitate. So agitate requires me to discard the card. It does not go into my hand. And if I were to agitate, I would gain 1 loyalist down here. Additionally, in a fox clearing, because it's a fox card, I get to flip this to governing. Now, if I were to bring a bird card to my hand, I get to do an empower action. Now, this is a little bit different. So I would choose a clearing, and I would roll a die. So I'll choose this one. And I roll this. And it's a 2. So the number that I roll is the number of warriors that I take out of this clearing. And with these warriors, I can either add them to my loyalists, which I would only really be able to add 1 here, or I can put them back into supply in exchange for gaining a VP if I still rule the clearing. If I didn't rule the clearing, then I wouldn't be able to gain anything. Next, you are inspired. You either get to craft with your assemblies or draw cards per card draw symbol here. And so I get the choice here of either drawing a card or crafting. Then we adjourn. If there's any assemblies on the board that I don't want there, I can remove them if I want. Then the main scoring ability is Oversee. So for each governing assembly that has any enemy buildings or tokens, I am going to score a certain amount of points. Then finally, I draw a card and discard a card. Now for the fan favorite, Knaves of the Deepwood. First and foremost, Knaves of the Deepwood and Vagabond cannot be in the same game whatsoever. If you are playing this with just normal setup rules, then you just avoid that by making sure nobody does that. In advanced setup, before you even deal out the cards, you decide whether or not to omit groups. If you're playing with Vagabonds, you will be omitting the Knaves of the Deepwood card, and if you're playing with Knaves of the Deepwood, you will be omitting the Vagabond cards. The Knaves of the Deepwood are going to have these 12 Knave Captains that they can choose from. In advanced setup, you are going to have 4 of these dealt out at random, and you are going to pick 3 and ignore 1 of these. If you're just doing normal setup, you get to choose 3 out of all 12. For each of these characters, you're going to be taking their matching meeple, and you're going to add them to your whole setup. Then you are going to take 1 captain and place it in a forest. And you're also going to have a skunk warrior accompanying it, and you're going to repeat the process for each of the captains, provided that you were choosing a different forest clearing for each. Then you are going to flip your player board. Your Knave Captains are going to have 2 items each listed on their card, and you are going to collect those corresponding items and put them in your stash on their unused side. Additionally, you are going to be putting all your acclaim tokens here. Each of these tokens are going to be double-sided. These have a side with an X. This generally doesn't mean anything, and you don't really have to worry about this too much unless you're using crafting in weird ways. Then these will be used to signify which enclaves have or have not been used for crafting this round. You'll be setting these in stacks of 2. It's a little hard to see. First passive is Deepwood Runners. As you can sort of guess from the setup with them in forests, they can move in and out of forests adjacent, kind of similar to the Vagabond. So when doing a move, I could go from forest to clearing, clearing to forest, or I could even go forest to forest. If any of my moves involve the forest, that ignores rule entirely. Next passive is Follow Me. When you are moving a captain, you can move the skunks in the same area with it. They will also join you in battle when you're fighting. The skunks will take hits before the captain. The next passive is Have at Thee. So let's say that I am fighting the cats here, and this is what I rolled. So one of my skunks would be defeated, and 2 of the cats are defeated. Whenever you are defeating in battle one or more warriors, you are allowed to take one of them and place them in the forest as a hostage. Notably, the forest that you're placing them in cannot have any other meeples in it. So if there was a situation like this, where there were already hostages in the forests that are adjacent here, these 2 units would just be defeated as normal. I would not be allowed to take more hostages. Additionally, after any battle that the Knaves instigate, even if literally nothing happens, you will place an acclaim token if it does not already have one. This would also apply if you just get completely wiped out or something like that. You would still place the acclaim token. The final passive here is called Runaway. If the cats were to just completely destroy this acclaim token, whenever any of your acclaim tokens are destroyed, you take a skunk from your reserve, give it to the faction that defeated that, and that faction gets to place this skunk in an adjacent forest of their choice. Let's discuss a turn. For Birdsong, you first ready, which involves you taking one of these face-up captains of your choice and placing it in the acting captain slot. At the end of turn, you'll be turning these face down, and so on later turns, you'll have fewer face-ups to choose from. If the Knave Captain in question was defeated and had its meeple removed for any reason, you would first take that meeple and place it in a forest of your choice. Let's say, for example, I do it here. When you do this, you'll be returning any hostages that are in that forest and any forests adjacent to it. So these would all be returned. But for example, if there was a hostage there, it would be completely unaffected. Your Knave Captains are all going to have different abilities, but only the active captain is the one that you'll be able to use the abilities of. So here, this affects nab battles. This one has an assault ability, but it's not the acting captain, so I wouldn't be able to benefit from that. Next, in Daylight, you get to take up to 4 actions, unless you had to place your Knave Captain this turn because it was defeated. In that case, you'll be taking only 3 actions. You have 4 different actions that you can take. You can move. The next thing that you can do is battle at the captains. The next thing I can do is filch. So this allows me to just look at somebody's crafted items and just be like, this belongs to me now. And you just add it to your stash. Additionally, using the suits of your captains as crafting material, you can instead craft a cart. So if I wanted to craft this sword, I'd need 2 captains in fox clearings, and I'd be able to craft this. However, if I'm crafting using filch, I will not get any of the victory points listed here. The fourth thing, and one of the more complicated things for this faction to do, is to use items. So there are 7 different items, and they all have different effects. When you use an item similar to the Vagabond, you will be flipping it face down, and you will be unable to use it. So let's go over the different actions. The first action is Boots. They let you dash, and when you dash, you get to move twice, ignoring rule each time. this can be used to move through forests as well. Next is the sword. This lets you assault. When you assault, when you go to take prisoners, you will instead be taking all hits as prisoners. So in this case, skunk gets removed, I hit 3 cats. I get to take as many hostage as I want, so I could do this. But normally I would only be allowed to place 1. Next is skirmish. This is the crossbow. When you do this, you can move from a forest to a clearing and then also battle in the same turn. If you are skirmishing, you will ignore the first hit you take. Next is nab the bag. You'll do battle, and if the captain would be hit, you instead move the captain to a forest instead of having it die. But if the captain didn't get hit, then you may move after battle if you would like. Next is revel, the kettle. When you revel, you get to place an acclaim down. You also get to place a skunk warrior, unless there was already an acclaim down, which in that case, if you revel, you get 2 skunks instead. Next are the coins gift. When you gift, you place an acclaim and you draw a card. Again, like the other one, if there was already an acclaim, you draw 2 cards instead. Finally, there is serve the hammer. If you use serve, you just simply place an acclaim. But if a claim was already there, you get to craft normally using your acclaim to craft of matching suits instead of your warriors. Also, you will be able to get victory points this way. At Malk the Powerful, you will gain a point for every 2 hostages and a victory point for every 2 acclaim. Notably, you don't add them together, so while I have 6 total, it's only 3 of each, so I would only get 2 points instead of 3. Next, I can protect the weak, so per each acclaim that I have, I could discard a matching card to place a skunk at it. Then I get to take it easy. I would then flip my captain card face down, and that would typically be it. Otherwise, if all 3 of my captain cards are face down, I flip them all face up, in addition to every single one of my items that have been used in the stash. Additionally, during Take It Easy, any player with the most hostages gets to choose a clearing, and they get to put any of their hostages back into that clearing who are adjacent to it. So in this case, it is the cats, but they're all spread out. So that player could do this. They could do this. They could, if they really felt like it, just do this and leave the other hostages behind if they really felt like it. I would not recommend that, but you get the idea. Then I draw a card, discard down to 5. Some important notes about the Lord of the Hundreds and the Keepers in Iron as they relate to the Knaves of the Deepwood. First and foremost, additionally, both the Keepers in Iron and the Lord of the Hundreds have a sort of fail state that's like, oh, if you don't have any warriors down, you get to place this thing. When those fail states are checked, they do not check for prisoners. So for both of these factions, if these were the only pieces that they had on board, those fail safes would come into effect, even though they're technically on the board.